meeting is being recorded.
All right, fantastic. Welcome, everybody. It's so nice to see all your faces here today. We're excited to be here and to share our talk on launching our medical education scholarship to new and exciting galaxies. My name is Christina Caljo, and I'm from the Medical College of Wisconsin. I'm an assistant professor over in the Department of Ob-Gyn, and we also have the Current Institute, which is a department for the transformation of medical education. I will pass on the mic for Dr. Jacques to introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Laura Jacques. I'm at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I'm also an assistant professor, and I am the Director of Medical Student Education, as well as our Departmental Education Committee Director. And then Dr. Ralph.
Hi, I'm Jessica Ralph. I am an assistant professor of OB-GYN at the University of Minnesota, as well as the medical director of our general OB-GYN office here, and of Whole Women's Health of the Twin Cities. So I'm really excited to be with you guys today.
Fantastic, thank you. And I have put into the chat the workbook, the FDS workbook that we've created for today's session. And so as we have people dropping in, you can open that up and use it as you need to as we go through some of the activities today. And you can, share it with any of your other colleagues if you find that they're helpful for you. So ultimately for today, what we're going to do is go through this process of ideation, implementation, and dissemination when it comes to medical education research. And so we're going to focus specifically on kind of like a speed research networking activity to talk about some of the ideas that we have and maybe revitalize some things or network across areas or specialties or even, institutions. So that way we can really get and kick off some of these ideas. Then we'll apply some strategies to make sure that once we have this idea, we can actually implement it and make sure that it's a project that we can actually complete. And then finally, we'll also highlight quite a bit of the dissemination tools and strategies. So that way, when we do come up with this brilliant idea and we have all this data, we actually are able to disseminate it and share it with our colleagues and also utilize it for our own professional development.
Okay, so hopefully to inspire you, we all know that in academic medicine, excellent scholarship is a key factor to our credibility, our authority, and our ultimately our promotion. And even prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, unfortunately, women continue to lag men when it comes to demonstrating the power of their scholarship. We comprise less than half of authors in medical journals and are awarded fewer research grants, and we make up fewer editors-in-chief in medical journals. This likely contributes in part to the fact that women, though we comprise more than half of medical school graduates, don't make up the same percentage of associate or full professors or department chairs, although Dr. Claire, I see, is in our group today. Even among OB-GYN departments, women make up only 1/4 of chair positions, though we comprise 85% of graduates. We can go to the next slide. And then I think, as we probably are all familiar, the current COVID-19 pandemic has really sort of put fuel to the fire in these disparities. The responsibilities of child and elder care and housework disproportionately affected women. And we are also some of the main teachers of our medical students and residents. And so the transition of teaching from in-person to virtual disproportionately fell on us. And so this has really resulted in fewer projects and fewer manuscript submissions for women compared to our male counterparts, and continues to widen the promotion and tenure gap. And so, of course, I realize that these statistics are heavy, but I don't intend, and we don't intend to leave you dwelling on the enormity of the obstacles to research. We hope actually that by the end of this hour, you're really inspired to pick up your project, wherever it is in the process, and get it to the finish line. And hopefully, because you've learned some tips and tricks to ease the load of getting there, getting to the end. We want you to see that your interests and your passions, the work that you're doing right now, can count towards promotional capital if you just give it a little polish.
All right, thank you. So what we're going to do is, again, we put in the workbook into the chat, so that way you can work alongside us. And we know that it's a PDF. So if you have even, a piece of paper or you have your own computer open, you can utilize a Word document. But really what we want to start off with is setting your scholarly intentions. And so what we want to do is just take a moment and jot down all the educational scholarship ideas or projects that you have to finish. So you see here kind of like 3 sticky notes, quote unquote, where you have your project ideas or existing titles that maybe you need to finish or are kind of, dwindling and you just need to get them done. Then align, what was the project's purpose or goal there? So that way you make sure that you are very clear and you understand, all right, this is what I really hope to get out of this project. And if you maybe are still wondering or you don't quite know, just skip it because that's something that we can come back to. And then finally, that third sticky note is what do you need to get to do, or what do you need to do to get this started or ultimately get it finished? So why don't we take about 3 minutes and you can fill those in. I just put in numbers 1 through 4, but some of you may have, 1 to 20 that could easily come to mind. So let's take 3 minutes and do a little brainstorming and setting scholarly intentions.
And then it looks like, oh, we've already reposted the link, you guys. So if there was some issues pulling it up, you could go ahead and grab it from the chat.
And I just put it in, I put the PDF in again too. All right, so maybe take like 60 more seconds, jot down the last ideas or existing titles that you might have, and we can follow up with our intentions for today. All right, so now that you've written down, or at least, had like a quick brain dump of all the different things that you're working on specific to educational scholarship, now think about one of those specific projects, because I think if we look at all of them, we'll get overwhelmed, and that's sometimes what paralyzes us. So focus on one of those projects, whether it's one that you're close to finishing or one that you're just so excited to get started. Think about the following now. What keeps you up at night or really challenges you about this project? So is it, specifically at a specific stage that's keeping you kind of like up at night, that's wondering, all right, how do I get this finished or what do I do with it? And then also write down what excites you and energizes you about this project. What is so compelling about it that it makes you want to do it and get it done? So again, why don't you take about a minute to reflect on those as well? All right. So as we move into this first idea of ideation, And yes, we're very much embracing the whole galaxy theme here. So we are going to now think about that specific project, whether it's just kickstarting or whether you are close to finishing. And we're going to jump into our networking activity. And so speed research networking, kind of like the moniker of like speed dating, is going to be an opportunity where you get to meet some colleagues who are on today's call and talk about this project, whether it's an idea, whether it's close to being finished, and determine, whether there's ways in which you can develop a new collaborative effort, whether you can get some support and, navigate through a specific like barrier or stumbling block. And so really, in person in Florida, we would have totally been doing our elbow bumps. But in this case, we're going to do a little bit of breakout groups. And so the way this is going to look is you have the opportunity to talk about your project or your idea. And there's going to be 4 ways in which you can talk about it. So you have no idea. So perhaps it's like something that's been percolating in your mind, this research project, and you're curious about something, but you don't really even know where to begin, or you're interested in ... And so there are some sentence starters in your workbook as well to kind of guide you through that. If you're thinking about, I have this little smidgen of an idea, but I don't quite know what to do with it. Otherwise, you can think about, I have to start something somewhere. I have so many ideas. There's so many pieces to this larger project. I just need to start somewhere. And maybe it's even just starting, like finding a collaborator. Maybe it's finding somebody who can help you. Then the next one could be, I just need to finish it. I'm working on something. I need to finish this, whether it's perhaps data collection, whether it's analysis, whether it's coming up with even a title for your, final manuscript or for the presentation. So thinking ultimately about what is that one last piece. And then you may think too, well, you know what, this is a project that I'm pretty much done with, and I may just need to write up the results, or, I need to find another place, perhaps even to present this, or I need to really submit that manuscript. Another one is, what's the next application of this project? Could I find somebody in this, in this environment who I can maybe collaborate with? So what I want us to do now is Jessica is going to break us up into groups, and we'll have about 8 to 10 minutes. And with your small groups, use the sentence starters or just talk a little bit about the institution that you're with, what your role is, and then focus a little bit about, what's this project, what's the idea, and ultimately, where do you fit into these quadrants? Do you need to finish something? Is it percolating? Do you just need to get some support through a barrier? So Jessica, I think what we can do is break out into our groups.
Perfect. I was going to do 3 groups. Is that okay?
Perfect. That sounds great.
Okay. All right, here we go.
Welcome back. I hope you all had some really fantastic conversation. And why don't we open it up for some report outs? What ideas, points, or considerations, solutions perhaps were discussed in your groups? So any volunteers to come on the microphone? I think there's enough of us that we can easily go onto the mic.
I can start. Thank you for getting me into a group when I got bumped out for a minute. I'm Jennifer Allen. I'm the program director at the Medical College of Georgia, and am currently doing the APGO Scholars and Leaders program this year. So I need to do a research project. And one thing I'm really hoping to work on, and it's at the very beginning stages, is improving resident education with regard to menopause, since that's sort of my niche and what I have a passion in doing. So Dr. Claire was in my group and Elise was in my group, and Dr. Claire gave me a couple of great ideas about discovering gaps in faculty knowledge, which certainly can affect resident knowledge, and maybe surveying my crew locally. Also, in terms of measures, potentially drilling down on CREOG menopause questions, like how are my residents doing on those, and getting a baseline. and considering, after implementing whatever intervention or teaching I do, looking at post scores, do pre-test, post-test sort of thing potentially. So I got a lot of good ideas actually, and that was really encouraging.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jennifer. Anybody else? How about one more perhaps of what were some takeaways from your conversations?
Our group talks a little bit about what do you do when your manuscript, you're not getting anywhere with your manuscript, and how do you kind of triage the next journal, which I know Dr. Shax will present a few tips and tricks that we put together for later in the talk. But yeah, it was Dr. Singh has a project that's awesome for trying to introduce medical students to your patients, and we just need to find a home for it.
Fabulous. All right. So I think it's always helpful to have this kind of experience where you can talk about your research, you can talk about project ideas, or, even some of this, like, I love that word, like triaging where to go or what to do with the manuscript, or, sometimes it's like in each of these areas, each of these layers, there's a stumbling block almost that some of us are experts at navigating and some of us just need a little bit more support. So as we go through, many of you, probably all of you, have seen this acronym of FINER. And I always think, oh my gosh, we're going to talk about this again. But the funny thing is that I think as you go through, you really start honing in on the specific areas of your project. So that way you're able to frame it or even reframe it. Sometimes I think we start off with these amazing ideas, and honestly, can it be something that we accomplish? If it involves, so many students or so many faculty members, do we have access to those people? So thinking about, is this feasible? Can you actually accomplish it? And if you think about your project and you say, you know what, I can't accomplish this, but I can do this. I think that's the whole reason that we look at some of this. Interesting. I think all of us, because we're here today, we're clearly excited about educational research. So I think we always find our work interesting, but the question then there is, will others be able to use these results? Or are we able to talk about our project or our research area so that way somebody could recreate it or also take it and learn from it and utilize it in another way? Which is kind of like that idea of novel. What does it add to the literature? There's so much out there right now. Educational scholarship is growing enormously, where we're always getting pinged with new publications, new ideas, new topics that are popping up. So again, thinking about what is your project, what is your scholarship going to add to what's existing? Ethical, of course, we're all very good friends with our IRB and our ethicists. So definitely thinking about and making that time in your schedule for starting an IRB, for finishing it, for making sure that you're able to adequately meet the needs of your IRB as well, because that can definitely be a stumbling block for many of our researchers. And then relevant, how is it going to make a difference in all of the work that we do? Is it going to make something easier? Is it going to highlight a disparity that we can address more poignantly? What is it going to do for our work moving forward? So I know that we always talk about FINER, but definitely utilizing those elements and thinking about your project and how can you frame it or reframe it so that way you can move forward. So the next area that I think some individuals get a little tripped up on is this idea of theory or theoretical frameworks. And what we're seeing in many, many, many journals now, and even now I'm seeing it in conference proposals where individuals and the reviewers and the editors are looking for specifically, how are you talking about theory? And it's this abstract idea that, especially if, education isn't something that you formally have trained in, it can be somewhat complex. And so again, going back to that workbook, we have highlighted 5 of the main theories that are common in educational research. And so ultimately, we have here kind of like designated these lenses. And so if you think about theory, it's the way in which you're looking at a project, or you're looking at how people work together, or you're looking at what the reactions are in different ways. And so you can use kind of like that zoom lens and look closely at specific groups of people or a small amount of individuals. Or you can take that broad approach and think about, all right, how is the whole organization going to react to it? And so I think it's really important that, utilizing some of that and just being aware of, all right, how am I going to put this into my manuscript? How am I going to talk about it when I do give a presentation? And I always like to say, you can head over to like Google Scholar, you can even go over into Google Images, and you can type in the keywords of your project that are the foundation of your project. And oftentimes there will already be something that can support your next steps. So don't let it be something that intimidates you, because I think oftentimes it's just this abstract terminology, but it's actually very clear in how to integrate it into your work. And so one of the next components too is this idea of the advancement of yourself as a scholar. And so I use this quote by Angela Duckworth here: as much as talent counts, effort counts twice. So that doesn't mean that you're going to be self-plagiarizing, which is a thing. Rather, it's taking a project that you've worked on, that you've put and committed all this time to, and now thinking about, all right, what can you take from it, or what maybe you didn't identify or talk about right away, and utilize it for the next presentation. So always considering and having this timeline set up almost, where you're thinking about, all right, what is going to be the next iteration? What population can I apply this to, especially if it's a workshop scenario, if it's, some faculty development, can you now expand it to different specialties or departments, or talk to individuals across different institutions as well? So as we move on to our implementation, again, this is maybe an area where some individuals also find that they stumble upon, because they think, all right, I have this great idea. Some of us are the idea generators, and then it's thinking about, all right, how am I actually going to put it into practice? What am I actually going to do with it? And so I think it's important to then think about some of the bullet points here. So what are you going to consider? Again, thinking about, I have this amazing idea for this workshop, and it's going to be great, and everybody's going to love it and take so much away from it. But ultimately, the questions that you should think about is, overall, what's your project management going to be? Setting yourself up for success. So that means, having an online, shared folder or shared document. So that way, when you are collecting your data, or you are collecting particular items for analysis, everything can go into one shared place. So that way you're not scrambling or looking for files, or trying to remember, where did I save this? What did I do with it? What happened to it? And so I think that's really helpful for your project management. Even if you started a project and right now, and maybe you're thinking about, oh my gosh, I have stuff everywhere. Taking that, 10, 15, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and putting everything together so that way you can move forward and be a little bit more organized. You'll find that that's incredibly helpful too for, when it's time to come to submit a manuscript, or if it is time to report out, perhaps you have to give some grand round presentation to your department. It's so much easier to have it all put together in one location. And so I think from that point, then we can do a quick check-in with all of you. So like a weather check, we like to say. Some of you may have some tried and true organizational methods, perhaps even resources or strategies. You can either come onto the mic or pop those into the chat, so that way we can all learn from each other. But what are you using to help you with your educational research?
So I'm really new to trying to publish my work in educational research, and I do think that contacting your institutional librarian is really helpful, especially if you're trying to do like a lit review. Try to figure out how to hone in your question, focus in your question. That's been something really useful to me, and if others don't realize you can do that, that's a great idea.
Yes, we love the librarians. Those, I mean, those people, they are honestly gold. They are gold, gold, gold. Thank you. Other thoughts or considerations? What else are you utilizing to support your efforts?
I think sort of similar to what I think you're doing a little bit of here, peer-to-peer mentoring can be really helpful. Obviously, when you do become the accomplished published researcher, when you become Dr. Claire, then you help others who are on their way up as well. So peer-to-peer and help others on their way up.
And I think as a younger researcher, like piggybacking off of that idea, I tend to I try to sometimes use mentors like in specific things like, well, I know you're really good at this skill. Like you may not be the preeminent scholar on prep, but you have this skill that I don't. And like, can you help me with this part of my project? Which is also nice as an ask. Like, I'm not asking you for 6 months of work. I'm asking you for 1 week of editing, you know? So asking for those, like, I know you're really good at this skills. Can you help me with this little piece of the project?
Definitely. I think the idea of that peer mentoring is really, really helpful. And even thinking about, you know, fostering kind of like a research mentoring group in a sense, where let's say now you have a medical student that you've recruited who will be doing some qualitative analysis. So they're learning and they're also contributing to your scholarship. Then thinking about, you know, is there a trainee, is there a resident or fellow who can then take it, you know, to a little bit more. And so that way too, it's like this idea of like mentoring up and down. So that way your students and trainees are also keeping track of you too, which I've found to be incredibly beneficial for somebody to keep track of me and give them some encouragement too, to say, you know what, Dr. Caljo, you should be typing this, you should be writing this, get on it, is really helpful too.
Christina, one of my first mentors when I first joined faculty a long time ago taught me, you know, I think as we're first getting started, it's very overwhelming to think about creating a project and is there an IRB and who's going to help me with this? And, oh, I got to collect data and then I got to write it up and where am I going to put it? And one of the things he taught me was that number one, you don't have to do it all at one time, right? Set a goal to, number one, figure out how to do the IRB. Like that's all I have to accomplish this week. And then you make another tiny goal and another tiny goal and just kind of chip away at it and recognize that you don't have to have 5 hours to sit down and write a paper or complete the entire thing. Has that been something that you have found in your work has been helpful?
Yeah, yes, I would completely agree. Something else for faculty development that I do too is that I found helpful putting calendar reminders or even calendar holds. So that way you can have that call out and other people too can see, you know, this little chunk of time, whether it's, you know, something that you're going to be submitting finally, or, you know, it's finding that, you know, one piece of literature to add to your references or whatever. I find that having that calendar hold has been really helpful too, to keep people on track too. Yes, Laura, I love the sticky note checklist, the sticky notes on your computer. I think that's, and I do love my sticky
We don't
notes.
always need technology. Sometimes it's just like old school sticky notes. So I see when I get to my computer, oh yeah, that abstract is due next week or whatever it is. And I have them color coded by project.
Yes. And you can go to places like Paper Source and get some fabulous sticky notes too. So, you know, if that encourages anybody. And Laura too, I think you oftentimes talk about finding somebody who's you know, outside of your discipline and maybe, you know, seeking a PhD or a doctoral student or somebody else who can also support those efforts too, especially in this world of educational scholarship.
Yeah, one of my MD PhD students is on the talk, Elise Cowley. She's doing a PhD in microbiology, but I met her in the clinical world and she was incredible, super interested in OB-GYN content. And so we have collaborated on a couple different projects, and having somebody who has some of that dedicated research time and skills has been wonderful. And also a different perspective, that PhD perspective and micro perspective has been really interesting. So shout out to Elise.
Fantastic. All right. So keep those coming along. If you do think of another strategy or resource that in particular that, you realize, oh, this was really helpful along the way. I think what we'll do now is kind of jump into that idea of dissemination. Let's say we've taken this project from the idea, from this, little seed that was planted in your mind or that really spurred some enthusiasm and excitement. And now thinking about what to do with it once you've gotten to that point of dissemination. So Laura, I think I'll pass it on to you.
Perfect. And this actually hits home for what our group was talking about in our small group, which was where to go once the manuscript is done. And there's a lot of different ways to disseminate your work. And not all of them are sitting down to write a full manuscript. This social media quote kind of, I feel like, embodies what a lot of us feel, which is, oh my gosh, I just cannot get the time to put together this whole manuscript and send it out. And that's okay. There's other ways that you can start. So you can think about once maybe your data is half collected and you want to do some sort of an interim analysis. So you take a look at just a small amount of data. You might think about writing a research brief or a research letter. There are a lot of different journals that will accept short versions, and they're usually somewhere between 500 to 1,000 words. And it might be, say you have a project where it's a really important finding, but the end just isn't there. There just isn't enough participants, but there's an important finding. That might be an outlet for that. Or you have a prelim analysis where it's really important data and you don't want to wait because somebody might take your idea before you finish your full collection. Sometimes you can submit that preliminary information as well as a research letter. The other options that help many people get that manuscript off the ground are conferences like this. So you write an abstract and you submit it. That gives you a timeline. So you force yourself to collect your data, frame your thoughts, and submitting that abstract gets you ready, primes the pump to start a longer manuscript submission, and can hold you accountable because of those pre-imposed deadlines. What ways do you guys have? Put them in the chat. If there's things that you have been thinking about that you haven't gotten to, or places where you found inspiration to get a manuscript off the ground, go ahead and throw that in the chat. Some other ideas I heard when I was in my ASL program, we're setting calendar chunks of time. So if you have an administrator, or even if you run your own calendar, just have them put, and I personally need at least 2 hours. If I have less than an hour, I'm not going to be able to get anything done. I need time to get my mind into something to really start working on it. So set ahead calendar chunks of time, because otherwise it gets filled in with meetings. If you have administrative time and you don't plan ahead to get that manuscript written and block that time, you're going to end up just doing meetings and never have time to do it. So that's another way that you can really get things scheduled in a doable way. The other place that a lot of us probably know is MedEd portal. You can also put your curriculum there. So if you're evaluating a curriculum, then you can write it, you can do an analysis of it, and then you can publish the curriculum on MedEd portal and then maybe work on a full manuscript thereafter. Next slide. So one of the other things we had been talking about in our group is, okay, you finally found the time, you allotted all that time in your calendar, you wrote a manuscript. Now, where do you publish it? How do you know where to start? We all know like the big journals, the Green Journal, the Gray Journal, New England Journal, but a lot of times that's not the place where at least my work is going to end up. So how do you figure out where to start? And I've been interested to see, I've done some work with some PhD folks over the last 2 years, and their thought process about where to publish is really different than what mine has been. Mine has always been, okay, I'm going to start at a journal above where I think I'm going to get it published. And I'm going to get some feedback from that. I'm not going to let it crush me and demoralize me. And then I'm going to submit it to where I really think it's going to go. Like, for example, I want to get my paper into contraception. So I'll start at the Green Journal, knowing it's not going to go there, get feedback, and then plan to submit to contraception. But some of the other folks, like the basic science folks, they think about it in a different way. They submit it to like right around where they think they could get it in, or their target journal a little above. Then they get the feedback and they make their paper better. And then they submit it to somewhere higher. So they would do the opposite. They'd like submit it to something around contraception. And then they're like, great, they've given me feedback. My paper's better now, even though they rejected it. So now I'm going to submit it, you know, to the green journal. So it's a different way of thinking that I personally had never thought of, but I think is interesting. There's some resources that you can use. So we've listed some here. You guys may have heard these. There's Jane. This is where you can plug in your abstract. It's free, and it'll give you some ideas about where you might be accepted. Elsevier also has a similar type of program. Another thing you can do, many journals will allow you to send an email and say, do you think this content is something that would be of interest to your readers? And they'll turn that around pretty fast and let you know whether or not they think it's even worth submitting. It's not a guaranteed acceptance. So if they say, yeah, please submit, it doesn't mean it's going to get taken, but at least you know that they're looking at something, the content itself is acceptable to their journal. And those will usually turn around in a week or so. Whereas if you submitted something, it can take much longer and really slow down your momentum. So if you guys have any ideas about how you pick journals, go ahead and throw those in there in the chat. Some other things that can be of use is looking at where your references are from. So those are probably journals that have content that's similar to yours. That's why you've used their papers as a reference. So you can look at those journals, look them up, look at the impact factors, see if that looks like a fit for your work. The other thing that's been put out is AAMC, specific to educational research, has a collated collection of journals with some information about them and annotated bibliography, where you can review that and get a sense of whether any of those journals would be of use. And we've actually taken that, next slide, please, Keljo, and made a Google Sheet, which takes some of those journals and has added some other journals that are more specific to OBGYN educational scholarship or OBGYN scholarship. And we're going to put the link in the chat. You can access this, you can add to it. We hope for it to be like a living document that you share with whoever you want. And there's a comment section. It'll say like, you know, what the journal is, what they take, what the impact factor is. And then in the comment section, we can put your experience. Like they say it takes 1 month, but it took me 6 months before I got my first review, or whatever it is, so that people get a sense of what it's like to submit to that journal and hopefully grow this as a resource for people. The other thing that comes up, next slide, please, is some of these journals want you to suggest authors. And reviewers. How do you know who to suggest as a reviewer? If you guys have any ideas, go ahead and put them in the chat. But it's important to think about reviewers. This is something I've learned more recently and over the years. You want to pick people who are knowledgeable about the way that you're doing your research, so the methodology. Like if it's a qualitative study, you want to suggest people that are more familiar with qualitative work. Because if you get a reviewer who does quantitative work and they're trying to figure out whether your research is valid as a qualitative study, you may be less likely to get into that. So suggest people that use your methodology and that understand the literature so they know where you would be able to fill a gap. And how do you know who these people are? So one way to know, it can be really challenging. One is just experience. One is asking those peer mentors that we talked about that are doing research. Like, who do you suggest? Another is looking again at the people who you've referenced. Or maybe you didn't even use them as references, but you read their papers as you were trying to get an idea of the literature and the background. And those are people you could suggest. How do you get their information? Well, you have to Google them, figure out where they're at now, and then email their department coordinator or administrator and say, I'm really hoping to list so-and-so as a reviewer. And I was wondering if you could give me their email or if they would be accepting of doing this. And then they'll check and then they'll send you back their contact if they're interested. And then that person's also going to be engaged and like ready if they send them that invite to hopefully review your paper. We also wanted to add the opportunity for all of you and anybody that you know to put yourself out there as a reviewer. I have found this to be a really helpful thing in my career, is to read other people's papers, see what they're doing, be able to evaluate them critically. And so we have put together, as a second tab of that Google sheet that we sent out to you, a list of reviewers. And we would hope that you guys, if you wanted to be a reviewer of educational scholarship, that you would list your contact and what your area of interest or expertise is. And then that you would share this with as many people as you know that might be interested, so that we can grow a body of people that want to do this work. So that is really what I've got for dissemination. So we'd be really happy to take any questions or thoughts in the last few minutes that we have.
These resources and ideas are fantastic. Thank you so much. I've been busy saving and emailing myself information. This is great.
I was going to say another thing. I've been doing the same thing, emailing and putting stuff in my notes on my iPad. I think you guys are really thoughtful about the things that your audience needed to hear. So I really appreciate that. And hopefully lots of people who couldn't join today will go back and watch the video and be able to use this. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, and please share these materials with anybody that you know. We hope for this to be broadly available and helpful. Especially the Google Sheet. I'm like very excited about that.
And of course, hopefully now you have this as a national presentation, and you'll find a way to get this information published if you haven't already.
That's lovely. Full circle. That is perfect.
Dr. Singh, hopefully we gave you some tips or thoughts about where to submit next. But we're happy to talk more if you.
No, definitely. Thank you so much. This is so helpful.
Good.
And I was telling Dr. Singh to go back to what we had talked about. There's many ways to disseminate work. She presented this idea that she's trying to publish with student bio cards at the ASL APGO conference 2 or 3 years ago. And we actually adopted a modified version of it at our institution. And I have another colleague at another institution who similarly adopted a modified version of it. So even if she, no matter what happens with that manuscript, she's already impacted 2 institutions and how they take care of their learners.
And Tara, if I may say also, that is something that should go in your education. I'm putting on my UMEC hat. That should go in your education portfolio, because that is evidence of scholarship, and it's evidence of dissemination of your work. So, being able to say that it's being adopted and used at other institutions can be really helpful for your profession, for you professionally.
Thank you. It's not something you think about unless you actually hear from somebody that they're using it. So it's great to hear that today, and it's also a helpful reminder to put it in the portfolio.
Oh, I have another idea. Okay, one of the other things we've been doing, and this was thanks to Elise, the MD PhD student, those little things that you take pictures of, what are they called? The codes, QR codes. So you can link. So for these, if you have materials put together and you create a QR code so people can scan it and use those materials, you can add Qualtrics or survey questions ahead of time to that in order for people to access it. And it can say what institution they are from and what they're using it for. And then you also have more evidence of, how your work is being disseminated or where it's being used.
That is really interesting. Thank you.
And one of the tips that Dr. Caljo shared with me, and maybe Laura on one of these talks some time ago, was to change the title when you share your work at different places. So when you're updating your CV for your next P&T committee meeting, it doesn't just look like you gave the same talk each time as you do your rounds. So
it can't be just the title, but like you have to change the content.
Point of really
you can take it and implement it in different audiences. I
you
just
can
don't
tweak
think
about the
it
title
at the
very
same
much.
time. Yeah, and
Sort of
she's
an
really good at
afterthought.
titles. She's really good at titles.
I do love a good title and a good acronym. Those are my favorite activities. If that could be my job all day, every day. All right. Well, I will put my email in the chat if there's any questions. You know, this is obviously an area that is just tremendous. I mean, it's like, I think the theme here for galaxies is truly, truly a great comparison, because I mean, it is endless. You have an idea and you can run with it and do some fabulous things. So thanks so much for all of you for attending today. It was a pleasure to see all of you. And hopefully next year we'll be in person.
All right, thank you. Christina, Jessica, that was great. Congratulations. That was a really great presentation and such great information and dissemination of information. So excited to, you know, hopefully hear from your team again with some updates next year at our in-person meeting that I'm convinced we're going to have.
It has to happen, right?
Yeah.